I'm Nick Schulz. I'm the editor of the American Magazine and the DeWitt Wallace Fellow here at the American Enterprise Institute. I'm delighted to be joined today by Alex Pollock. Alex is a resident fellow here at AEI, where he studies and works on financial services and financial regulation, the housing industry. And we're here today to talk about this financial crisis that we, I believe, are starting to emerge from, or have emerged from, stabilized a little bit. The housing market seems to have stabilized some. And get some of your thoughts and reflections on what we've learned and what maybe we still need to learn. Alex, my first question for you is as follows. The public and policymakers are still trying to make sense of the tumult that we started in 2007 through 2008 and 9. This tumult of the last few years in financial markets. And I suspect we're going to be trying to figure this out for a long time. Now, you studied the history of booms and busts and financial panics and crises. So my question for you is, was there anything truly unique or new or different this time around that we can point to and that we should be paying attention to and try to address?
I don't believe so. Not anything truly unique. I was at a conference, I guess last year, and people kept talking about a 100-year flood. Well, even a 100-year flood wouldn't be unique. You'd have it once every 100 years. And I said, well, you know, the problem with 100-year floods is they happen every 10 or 20 years. And there's another line in this way from Paul Volcker, the former Fed chairman, who said, every 10 years we have the greatest crisis in 50 years. And every time we have a crisis, there's a period of agonizing, of searching for the guilty. We even now have a congressionally appointed committee, which some of our colleagues serve on, to search for the guilty and trying to understand things. But then the inevitable recovery comes, as it's now coming, and life goes on, and we get all interested in the next thing. We, as the financial world, as a culture, doesn't have much historical sense. But every time we do it, of course, it's intense. This one was a very big bubble. It fastened on U.S. housing, which is a huge market, the biggest asset class that there is, with very heavy lending through mortgage loans. Mortgage loans in America represent the biggest debt market in the world. The bubble was the expansion of debt and the blowing up of the prices of these assets, both very big and very important classes of assets and debt, and real assets in the form of houses, and financial assets, which are also somebody's liability in the form of mortgages. So it was a big bubble and a big, very, very severe bust with obviously important damage to the economy, which we're now coming out of, as we inevitably will.
Well, let me on that point, let me suggest something that maybe...
But let me just say,
okay.
conclude,
Okay.
But nothing fundamentally new.
Okay, well, but let me, to that point about whether or not something is new, and this is based on some of your writings that I have read. Now, maybe this isn't new in the 100-year flood category, but starting in, you've pointed out that starting in about the 1970s, 1974, for example, that the concentration of real estate risk held by banks, both large banks and small banks, started going up and up and up and up and
Yes.
up. And there was a slight downturn in the 1990s when there was a real estate correction, and then it continued going up again and again and again to unprecedented levels of concentration of real estate risk
In banks.
So
Yeah.
this seems new-ish, at least. I mean, maybe we've had other financial crises and there have been other causes, but what has been driving this concentration of risk? And then if you could follow that up by saying, is this something we should be doing something about? So there's a driving component. Why are banks taking on more risk in real estate, which is cyclical, and there could be problems with that? And then what if anything, should we do about it?
Anybody who's ever thought about banking and finance knows that real estate is cyclical. Commercial real estate is especially cyclical, but so is residential real estate, and that you're dealing properties whose price, when you get into the crisis, may go down a lot, as we keep discovering in commercial real estate, and we now have discovered in residential real estate again. The fathers of the National Banking Act of 1863, thinking about this problem of real estate and banks, and they were chartering the new national banks. We're going to, as they saw it, provide a new currency, national bank notes for the United States. And they wanted these banks to be very sound and safe so the public could accept their notes with confidence. Their conclusion, national banks were prohibited from having any real estate loans whatsoever. So there's one end of a spectrum. As financial system developed, the state banks could always do, some banks which were chartered by states instead of being national banks chartered by the federal government, could always do real estate, and they kept having these periodic booms and busts in real estate. But the national banks wanted into this business, and they got into it. And in addition, of course, there was a specialized real estate banking entity called savings and loans, and we'll all remember what happened to them. All right, we have the whole financial system dealing with all kinds of finance, corporate, municipal, project, real estate, residential and commercial, consumer, and what have you. And especially in this country, a good bit of that financing goes on in markets and markets for debt and equity, but markets for various kinds of debt, and a lot of it goes on in the banking system. Banks today are about a $13 trillion asset industry, which is big. But we do observe that over the last 35 years, as you say, there has been quite a remarkable continuing buildup of real estate risks in the bank. And this, while I'll stand by my previous statement that fundamental things haven't changed. The banking system in this country has changed with this buildup of real estate risk. And by real estate, I mean both commercial real estate, apartment buildings, office buildings, hotels, what have you, shopping centers, and residential real estate, houses and condominiums. So if we start looking at these numbers at the end of World War II as the sort of modern phase of American banking, we find for 30 years the real estate concentration of all banks together, the aggregate of the commercial banking, was about 25% of loans. 1974, the line turns up, as you were referring to, and it goes basically, with a few wiggles, but basically straight northeast for 35 years. Now we have a real estate bust. And think about a banking system. You go into a real estate bust and 25% of your loans are in real estate. That's one thing. You go into a real estate bust and 55% of your loans are in real estate. That's another whole world. You're going to have a much worse time. And indeed, we're going to have a very large, many hundreds of bank failures.
And in the case of small banks, their concentration was even higher, right?
Small banks, their concentration is almost 3/4 of loans. And all banks, which is little recognized, I think, by people, in a bank you have two basic classes of assets. You have loans and you have securities, investments, bonds. The huge real estate concentration in American banking occurred not only in loans, 55% of all banks, 74% of small banks, but of all banks, they also put their investment securities into real estate investments, almost 3/4. So in both parts of the balance sheet, you have this terrific real estate concentration. And that's certainly historically different, that role of the commercial banking system. We have to say, well, how do we really puzzle our way through thinking about how the financial system works when the banking system itself is so concentrated. A certain kind of risk we know is highly cyclical and subject to vicissitudes.